Hi, everyone. I know it's late, but I guarantee you that our closer has been worth waiting for. My name is Lauren Sudial-Lucas. I'm on the faculty here at Georgia State, and I'm the new director of our Center for Access to Justice. It's my great honor today to introduce Stephen Bright, President and Senior Counsel of the Southern Center for Human Rights. On paper, Steve's legendary. Unfortunately, you have that in your program, so I won't repeat it. But one thing that I think is of particular relevance to today's topic is that he's argued and won 3 cases in the Supreme Court, all of which involved race discrimination and jury selection. Aside from all of Steve's tangible accomplishments, those who know and who've worked with Steve know that he is quite simply a force. The very mention that Steve is looking into a possible violation in your county or state can strike fear into the heart of any government official. He tells it like it is, and more important, how it should be. And he has never been afraid to call out injustice in any form. Steve has served as an inspiration to legions of lawyers and students, many in this room, including myself, fighting against injustices in the criminal justice system. He is passionate about addressing underserved need in the South and has convinced more people than I think anyone can count to join him in that struggle. As I think Steve knows, he is the reason I came to Georgia and one of the primary reasons I have never left. I don't know anyone who has so wholly dedicated their life to fighting injustice and to ensuring that those within the criminal justice system know that someone sees them, sees what they are being subjected to, and will do whatever he possibly can to change that. I am grateful to call him not only a hero, but also my friend, Stephen Bright.
Thank you, Lauren. You're very sweet and very nice, and I appreciate it. And Judge Donald, it's so great to see you. I'm so glad to be together again, and I appreciate your kind remarks. But more than all, I appreciate you being here with us today to share what you just did. You didn't say who'd exercise discretion, but I am, all right, in a few minutes. And I also want to say how great to have Vanita Gupta here with us today. I was at Justice last week, and I was talking about some of the things, and I said how incredibly remarkable that she and I have been in sort of parallel organizations and doing this work, and that she is the head of the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice is a marvelous thing. And it just shows how important it is to vote. I won't say who to vote for, but very important to vote because we have not had people like Vanita Gupta, and we have not had, as she and I talked about, the attention to the criminal justice system. The things that the Justice Department has done under her leadership, the report on Ferguson. A few years ago, we were having a Blue Ribbon Commission here, and we were talking about municipal courts and superior courts and whatever, and whenever this commission that had business leaders, judges, lawyers, all sorts of, like a typical blue ribbon commission, all sort of blue ribbon people on it. And when they would refer to the municipal courts, they always called them cash cows. And they were called that without any sense of irony whatsoever, that the purpose of these little municipal courts was to collect as much money as they could for their communities. And I was saying that it was so good to read the Ferguson report that talked about the fact that the police court there in Ferguson was about revenue generation. It wasn't about law enforcement. Just recently in Forsyth, Georgia, the police chief resigned because he said the city manager kept wanting him to go out on the interstate, post the offices on the interstate so that they could pull people over and fine them, so they raised money instead of what he wanted to do as a professional, which was have people in the community, policing the community, protecting the community, seeing what's going on in the neighborhoods, and all of that. And so money forced him out. He said, I'm here to be a law enforcement official, not here to collect money. But that's what these courts are all about. That's where the pressure has come from, is a little town, Warwick, Georgia. I'm not picking on it, but it's just an interesting 411 is the population. And the last year for which statistics are available brought in $1.4 million in fines. 88% of the budget, I don't know what the other 12% was, for a town of 411. Now the other point, which we don't have time for, but is just something to think about, you can imagine what kind of police department Warwick has. Just like you can imagine, and if you've ever been down there, you know what kind of police department East Point has, or Hapeville has, or any of these little municipalities. These police departments are to write tickets. They're not to deal with people when things get out of hand. And that's how we end up with all these people getting killed at the hands of some of these police departments. That's what happened in Minnesota, where you had two little towns sharing a police department, and they didn't know what they were doing. And so, you know, I feel like I wake up in the morning, I'm listening to NPR, and they say a person was killed, and almost as an afterthought, the victim was black and the police officer was white. We just hear that over and over again, and that financial pressure is contributing to that. I'll just make one or two quick points and we'll stop and go home. The criminal justice system is the part of our society that's been least affected by the civil rights movement. You go around the South, you see a lot of change. But you go into courthouses in most places, not Atlanta, not DeKalb County, but you go out in the places where we go, and you see that nothing has changed since the 1940s or 50s. The judge is white, the prosecutors are white, the court-appointed lawyers are white. The only person of color who's there in front of the bar is the person on trial. And even in communities that have substantial African-American populations, the jury is all white. You say, how can it be? Then in this community, it's 25% African-American, 30% African-American, that we have an all-white jury. And the answer to that is, of course, that the prosecutors have struck the people of color in the process of jury selection. And if there's one time when sort of the corruption, well, there's two times. I'll talk about the other in a second. When you really see the corruption of the system, the prosecutor strikes an African-American. Hopefully the defense lawyers will object, although very often they don't, because they don't want to take on race. They don't want to make the prosecutor unhappy. They don't want to make the judge unhappy. Well, let's say they do and they object. I object. That strike was based on race. And at that point we start the charade where the prosecutor says, oh, no, that strike wasn't based on race. That strike was based on the fact that the juror was looking at the ceiling during my questioning, or the juror was looking at her shoes, or whatever it may be, and everybody knows that's not the reason. The reason is race. We all know that. The judge knows that. I mean, the judge used to be the prosecutor before he became judge. He struck all the blacks when he was prosecutor. He knows how this game is played. This is his chief assistant, who's now moved up and become the prosecutor. And we go through this farcical procedure where all of these reasons are upheld. And on we go. One of our cases came down just recently from the Supreme Court. Was a case of a fellow named Timothy Foster. Who's tried in Rome. The prosecutor struck all the African Americans. His two lawyers in that case courageously kept saying, and they filed a motion before the trial, and they said, in this county, the prosecution always strikes all the African Americans during jury selection. We know they're going to do it in this case. But the Supreme Court decided a case last year called Batson versus Kentucky, which said you can't do it, and we ask you, don't let them do it. Of course, they did it anyway. And those lawyers, to their credit, objected every time. And the prosecutor at one point said, we demand an apology. We are so offended to be accused of race discrimination that we not only ask that these lawyers apologize to us, but that they apologize to this entire community. Well, you can imagine that's a little pressure on these lawyers. And of course, the judge has to do two things to find a violation. One, that the prosecutor intentionally discriminated on the basis of race. Very unlikely that the judge is going to find that, particularly if this is his fishing buddy or hunting buddy or former assistant who's there in front of him. Secondly, that the prosecutor lied about it by giving a reason that was not the true reason. Thurgood Marshall said when the case came down, this will never work. I mean, anybody can think of a reason. And indeed, that's proven to be the case. But in our case, we were able later, by I won't go into the details of it, but basically we were able to see the prosecution's file. These people who demanded an apology. And if ever there was an indication, as Chief Justice Roberts wrote in the case, if ever there was an indication of obsession with race, that everybody was marked and color-coded by race, everybody had a B by their name by race, there was a list of definite no's, all the people to be struck, and of those people, of the 6 people, 5 of them were African Americans. The first 5 were all going to be struck. There were memos in the file that says if it comes down to taking a black, maybe Miss Garrett will be okay. But Miss Garrett was never going to be on that jury. Miss Garrett was on the list of definite no's. And this is just a rare time when we pull back the curtain and we see most of the time, of course, we never know that. Most of the time this takes place up at the bench or takes place in the judge's office. And so we don't even know what is happening. And the person, as I said, the person in the community comes in and looks at the jury and thinks, gosh, this is not our community. And yet that's still going on. And as I said, many people are afraid to even raise it, which goes to my second and last point, which is just this. One of the people mentioned in one of the earlier panels, the Constitution, that we should have some protection from the Constitution of the United States because all of these things that we've been talking about, stopping people, and I'll just say this real quick, I'm struck by the random quality of it. You know, you're driving down the road, if you're a person of color, and if the little light that lights up the license plate happens to be out or happens to be broken, you're going to get pulled over. And you may then start an odyssey of tickets and fines you can't pay and probation and being called back again and again. Or you may have something even worse happen to you. You may not live to see the next day. But you heard from Atiyah about some of the clients that we have had who have been arrested. Mr. Edwards for burning leaves in his own yard, $500 fine for burning leaves in his own. This is a man who's intellectually disabled, has no cash income whatsoever, and goes to jail for that because of that. The law has been for a long time. Since 1956, the Supreme Court of the United States said there can be no equal justice when the kind of justice a person gets depends upon the amount of money he or she has. Of course, we all know that's a complete joke. Like the Pledge of Allegiance, I always say, when you're in the Pledge of Allegiance with liberty and justice for all, I mean, let's face it, it's a lie. It's a whopper. It's not true. It never has been true. It may never be true. But it's at least an aspiration, one would hope. But if we're going to try to enforce the protections that the Constitution has, and one of the most basic is that you cannot lock people up because they can't pay the fine. If they willfully refuse to pay the fine, you can. But if they cannot afford it, by the same token, a lot of people have their lives ruined just by simply not being able to make bail. Because you only have to miss a week or two of work, and you've lost your job, you've lost your home, you've lost your means of transportation. I mean, one woman was held one time, and her husband was on dialysis. She needed desperately to get her husband to dialysis, but she couldn't make bail. She didn't have a lawyer. And she'd never been arrested before in her life. And her husband died. And later, she was released on her personal promise to come back, and later all the charges were dismissed. But you wouldn't say that she wasn't punished in that particular case. And of course, we expect that to be the defense lawyer, that there's going to be a lawyer for people. Many of these courts operate without any lawyers, completely lawless in their operation. They're not only locking people up in violation of Supreme Court cases. One of the cases is called Bearden versus Georgia, which you'd think maybe we would follow, at least in Georgia, but we don't. If there's not a lawyer there and there's money on the table, the judge is probably not going to follow Bearden versus Georgia. And so we get to the point of our people. I mean, you look at children coming into court. Vanita talked about our case, NP versus Georgia, down in the Cordeo Judicial Circuit, where those children come into court and they meet a lawyer for 10 or 15 minutes. and then they plead guilty. And then they end up with $50 of court costs, $50 for a public defender. They didn't get $50 worth of legal services there. But we still, throughout this state, have people who are representing people who think that you can handle serious matters by just showing up at court 10 minutes before court starts, having a quick conversation with that person, and then doing something really significant like pleading guilty and being sentenced. And that's the other place where I think the complete corruption of the system is apparent to everybody. Done a great deal whether in juvenile court, whether in adult court. Heard a whole bunch of people in there before the bench. These people have all been over talking to people for 5, 10, 15 minutes. They're probably not to the same lawyer who's standing there with them. And the lawyer says, all these people have decided they want to plead guilty, and we've advised them, and they're all pleading guilty and knowing voluntary intelligence. And the judge then goes down, makes sure everybody's waiving their rights, and he always asks them, are you satisfied with your lawyer? And I was thinking, how would they know? They don't know what a lawyer does. All they did was talk to this person for 5 minutes. They don't know what they're entitled to, that they're entitled to an interview, they're entitled to some investigation of their case, they're entitled to some legal research on issues that may be raised in the case. They don't know any of that. How would they know? Oh, yes, they'll say, they're fine, they're with it. And at that point, the judge takes their plea and sentences them. And again, everybody in the courtroom knows what a completely corrupt thing that is. The judge knows, the prosecutor knows, the hapless defense lawyer standing there behind this line of people knows. They all know what is going on, and the people in the audience know. And again, what Judge Donald was talking about the legitimacy and the credibility of the courts, because what's most important here is liberty and life. We're costing people liberty and life, and it's very much related to race and poverty. But also, we had a case in Jefferson County Parish, Louisiana, where the prosecutors always struck all the African Americans from the jury. And in our brief to the Supreme Court, we said, you know, the black people in Jefferson Parish know that they're completely disenfranchised. They know that they do not have a place on the juries in that community. Another thing, the white people know it too. And everybody knows that these juries, these all-white juries in a community that's 20% African American, in a community that sent David Duke to the legislature as its representative, they know that this is not legitimate, this is not credible. And by the same token, when we do this meet 'em and plead 'em, and people go through this sort of rote process, there's no legal representation being provided. There's not an iota of legal representation. And so people's rights are not protected in the process of that. And so, you know, this is all what we have talked about all day today is so important because it decides things like whether a man dies because his wife can't make bail, whether a child in Cordele goes to college or goes to a juvenile facility and never gets their life straightened out again, whether someone gets life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for a bit of cocaine that weighs less than a nickel, whether children are taken away from their parents because people are thrown in jail for all sorts, Ed Johnson that Tia talked about. 4 o'clock in the morning, this guy just hadn't paid his tickets. 4 o'clock in the morning, all these police officers descend upon him, take him off, throw him in jail, and DFACS takes the children. Goodness gracious. Is that the best we can do for people? Where the Count Adams, a woman is 9 months pregnant with a problem pregnancy, is going to be sleeping on the floor of the Muskogee County Jail because the judge and recorder's court there threw her in jail because she couldn't pay a traffic ticket. There's no such thing as a small case in the criminal justice system. And we've heard a lot about it. And now what do we do about it? When Maui was talking in his part at one time. He said, we got to do this, that, and the other. And he said, but, you know, it seems impossible. And I'll just borrow from James Baldwin in The Fire Next Time. He says, I know that what I'm asking for is impossible. But in the time and the place where we are, in the circumstances that we face, the situation that we face, we can ask for nothing less than the impossible. And indeed, if you look at history, and you look particularly at the history of the African American experience, it testifies to over and over again overcoming the impossible. Thank you.